Welcome to Coastline. I'm Suzanne Larson. We're going to talk about natural disasters in this edition. And I'd like to say, first of all, that I am filling in for Rick Forshner, who is on hiatus. And I'm happy to introduce Lieutenant Colonel Neil Baxley.
Glad to be here, Suzanne.
Thank you for being here. Lieutenant Colonel Baxley is with the Beaufort County Sheriffs Department, and he is Director of Emergency Management. He handles all kinds of emergencies. You'd be surprised. Neil, tell us what we have to be concerned about here in Beaufort County.
Suzanne, Beaufort County faces every possible natural disaster except a volcano that we know about in the world. Obviously, hurricanes are our primary focus because we live on the southeast coast and we spend a lot of time preparing for them. But in the Emergency Management Division at the Sheriff's Office, we also worry about severe weather, thunderstorms that roll in. We worry about winter weather. We did have a blizzard in 2018. You recall the Great Blizzard of 2018. We do concern ourselves with earthquakes. South Carolina is very active seismically, and that's an issue that we prepare for. And we discovered a new threat, or were made aware of a new threat a couple of years ago. We have a tsunami threat. It's, the potential is very small, but the impact would be very large if it were to occur. So at the Emergency Management Division, we also prepare for that. And if you notice coming in on Highway 21 or in on 278 now or over on Hilton Head Island, you will see signs that say Beaufort County is storm ready. You will also see signs that say we are tsunami ready.
Well, I am glad to know that.
We did that through the Storm Ready and the Tsunami Ready programs are administered through the National Weather Service. And of course, we work with the Forecast Office in Charleston. A great bunch of folks. We work with them all the time. And they have a very lengthy set of criteria that we have to meet in order to become storm ready or tsunami ready. The tsunami program took us over a year to complete all of the tasks that the Weather Service put out for us. So those are the threats we face. And so at Emergency Management, we work year-round. We do tabletop planning. We do exercises. We meet with other emergency services and do joint exercises, whether it be a small communications exercise to make sure all the various redundant communications networks are functioning properly that we don't use every day, or it may be a full scale where we have everybody, EMS and the fire departments and the municipal police departments all involved practicing their roles in the event. And we do this type of stuff on a regular basis so that when the disaster threatens Beaufort County, we're as ready as we can be.
Well, that's very comforting. And I thank you for your hard work. It sounds like a lot of hard work. And I know you've had a lot of experience and you've endured many natural disasters, especially hurricanes. What do our citizens need to know?
The important thing that every individual in Beaufort County needs to know is that they need to have a plan, a real plan, not just something in their mind, but something they have sat down, talked about, probably put on paper. The Sheriff's Office Emergency Management Division has an app that is free to everybody. You go on iOS and Android devices. Just go to the Play Store and type in Beaufort County Emergency Management, and in that app, there is a section that will take you through the planning process, things that you need to be prepared for in the event of any type of natural disaster, such as having all of your important papers in one place, ready to go. Your deeds, your mortgages, insurance papers, powers of attorney, wills, those sort of things. Also, you need to have your medications prepared to be ready to grab them and go should that have to happen. And not just in hurricane evacuation. We get a bit of a notice in hurricanes, but if an earthquake were to strike, we would have no notice. It would just, the building would start shaking, and then you've got to seek shelter, safe shelter, and you would have to grab this kind of stuff and go. So this app will take you through the planning process, and that is the most important part of every individual's life here in Beaufort County, is they need to have a plan. If a hurricane were to threaten, if an earthquake were to strike, if a tornado were to strike, what would I do? Where would I go? What would I need to take with me?
Well, for those of us who are not particularly technically savvy, to download an app, you go to the which Play Store?
The Google Play Store. And the app is there. It's available for iOS and Android devices. Just type in Beaufort County Emergency Management, and it'll come up, and hit download, and the technology will do it all itself, and then you hit open.
Great, great. And will our cell phones work if there's a disaster?
Probably not. We rely on them heavily, but in truth, that will be the first communication system to fail in a true disaster. Okay. So we need to have other methods of communication.
Now, if we feel our houses start to shake in an earthquake, what's the first thing we do?
Drop cover and hold on. Get under something solid, a table, a dining room table, something like that. If you don't have that, get in a door jamb of an interior room and get as low as you can and just hold on till the shaking stops.
Well, I understand that with new construction nowadays, there are some earthquake protection policies in place. Are you familiar with any of those?
Only on the surface. Building codes is well aware of that, those requirements, and they enforce them, Beaufort County Building Codes and the municipal agencies, so I leave that to the experts.
And I was very surprised during the blizzard that we had a few years ago. We actually, most of us had power.
Because the ice that struck only lasted about 45 minutes that morning. It gave us a half an inch of ice on the roadways, but it wasn't an ice storm, which is what generally will take down power, and it wasn't a really heavy, wet snow. So pretty much everybody kept power throughout the event. We just could not drive around because of the ice on the roadways.
Well, what if we do have an ice storm and we lose power and it's freezing cold? We should have a fireplace? Or?
Well, you need to have a plan. If I'm going to lose electricity, where am I going to go? What am I going to do? How am I going to keep myself, in that scenario, how am I going to keep myself warm? We do have some great folks at Sea Island Presbyterian that open warming shelters during extremely cold snaps in the winter, and we coordinate that with them through emergency management to get the word out. And they can handle some folks, and if we had an extended length of time with power outage, obviously the power companies, Dominion and Paramount Electric and Santee, are working very hard to restore, but it is a tedious, labor-intensive process. So we would get with the Red Cross if it looked like it was going to be extended, and we would open some shelters that had generators so that we could heat folks, keep them warm, and feed them.
Oh, good. Well, I understand that our Beaufort County Emergency Management Division works closely with the National Weather Service. Can you tell us about that kind of coordination?
Right. The Beaufort County is covered by the Weather Forecasting Office in Charleston County, and we are very, very closely affiliated with them. We talk to them. Sometimes I talk to them daily, and they give us outstanding what we call spot forecasts. If we have an event going on in Beaufort County, say the RBC Heritage, they will give us spot forecast for what the weather each day is going to look like on Hilton Head. They will even assign a forecaster to an event that large on site. And so I'm calling them if we have an incident. Let's say we have a missing person over late in the evening. I will call Charleston Weather and get a spot forecast for the search area, because that affects how we conduct the search. You know, if it's cold weather, these people, the missing person is going to be subject to exposure. If it's nice warm weather and we're not expecting thunderstorms, we'll coordinate the search a little differently. Not that we won't do it, we'll keep doing it, but we'll do it in a different manner, different resources. And that affects all of that. So I'm on the phone with them regularly. It's a great group of people, and they give us fantastic forecasts. They're dead on.
All right. And the tsunami, if we had a tsunami in Beaufort County, how far inland would the strike be?
I've talked to the seismologist at the Seismology Center at College of Charleston about this event, and there are two seismic scenarios that would occur off the coast. One of them would give us about 2 hours notice, and the other would give us somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 6 hours notice. And so part of the planning was public education, which is what we're accomplishing right now, making people aware of it. It would only be a few hundred yards inland. It would affect primarily Defusky, Hilton Head, Fripp Harbor, Hunting, the barrier islands. And so folks on the beach and on the beachfront streets would be the most at risk, and they would be the ones that would need to get out of the way of the water, whether they evacuated up in one of the high-rise hotels or evacuated slightly inland. So we designated rally points, and we determined, meeting with the National Weather Service, that on Hilton Head, the school complex would be an adequate rally point, and for the northern barrier islands, the St. Helena Elementary School would be adequate. So you don't have to go any further than that, and it would just affect the beachfront communities.
And what about emergency communications? Would you broadcast on television and interrupt programming?
We would do everything available to us. We would use the emergency alert system, which overrides cable television, and you probably have experienced the monthly testing where it interrupts your favorite program. In my case, it's a Braves game. To put this is a monthly test of the system. We use social media at the Sheriff's Office heavily. We use our Nixle alerts. We use Twitter. We use Facebook. So we would be pumping information out across all of those to get the word out to everybody that, hey, this threat is occurring, take appropriate steps now.
I've seen them for tornadoes as well.
It would be the same process.
All right. Do you think we'll ever get a siren?
We're working on that. Beaufort County has acquired a federal grant to begin the process. It's a very expensive process to put up sirens, and there's a fallacy out there that sirens will warn folks indoors. They're outdoor warning sirens, and they're designed for folks that are out along the beach or in parks, recreation areas, golf courses, that sort of thing. So as we're planning the siren process now, where to put them, we're locating them in areas where they will reach folks in outdoor areas. They will not penetrate houses. They're not designed to do that. You need another type of alert system. And I highly recommend also a NOAA weather radio. You can purchase them at Lowe's, Walmart, Home Depot for under $40. Sometimes they run sales and they're only like $15. And they're battery operated and plugged in electric. But the sirens, they also have to go on public property that we own. And there's a lengthy permitting process to erect a tower. So we're working our way through all of that now. And the first phase is calling for about a dozen sirens, and then if we can secure funding, we will expand that number. We'll increase that number till we feel like we've adequately covered the outdoor areas.
Well, this is a large and complicated effort. You not only have to cover preparation, but recovery as well. So I appreciate all that you do. I know our viewers at home do as well. And we have about 1 minute left. If there's anything else you'd like to add before we toss to Scott.
Have a plan.
Have a plan. All right.
Have a plan.
Well, good advice, of course, from the expert, Lieutenant Colonel Neil Baxley. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Joining us today. And now we're going to toss to Scott Grooms, who is standing by at the National Weather Service in Charleston. Scott?
Thanks, Suzanne. We're here in Charleston, South Carolina, at the National Weather Service office, talking to Ron Morales. And again, it's hurricane season, so it's time to visit. Tell us, what are we looking for this year? What are we expecting this year?
Well, the official forecast from NOAA's National Climate Center is that we'll have a near to slightly below normal year. But we really don't want to focus too much on those seasonal forecasts because they are really just that, and it doesn't matter whether you get one storm or 20 storms out there, it matters where they hit. And if they hit you, it's a bad year. So we want people to prepare for that.
In hurricane season, everybody's looking at it. The forecasting over the past few years has gotten much better. New products coming out and such. How has that changed the look of the weather industry?
Well, the forecasts for the hurricanes or tropical systems in general have definitely gotten better as far as the track. So where are the storms going to be? They've gotten a lot better over the last decade or so. But what hasn't improved as rapidly is the intensity or how strong the storm is going to be. So we're working a lot on that, a lot of research, a lot of resources are going into improving the intensity or the strength of the forecast for the hurricane itself. So it's changed as far as, I think, expectations of our customers and partners have changed because everyone wants it to be even more accurate than it actually is. So that's a challenge for us to kind of stay within the bounds of what the science constrains us with, but still give decision makers such as an emergency manager the details that they need to make the decisions that they need to protect their folks.
I've noticed even with the products that have come out, they're a lot more interactive for the consumer too.
There are a lot of products out there, and actually that can be confusing at times. There's a lot of sources of information for weather out there. Some are not as credible. We try to be the credible sort of weather authority for all the weather information that's out there. Our primary customer, what we call our deep core customer, is the emergency management community. The media as well is a mouthpiece for what we do. The emergency managers, we really try to provide them as detailed as information as possible because they have to make decisions that protect lives and property for their communities as well.
We were talking to Neil Baxley earlier, and he's like, y'all can really get detailed with Beaufort County. So once you pinpoint what you want, even for, not just for a hurricane, but say we're having an event at the air station, or we're having an event, like the Heritage, for example, the golf tournament.
Right.
Y'all really work hand in hand with emergency management and our Sheriff's Department to give them an accurate forecast.
Right. So in the last several 5 to 10 years, the National Weather Service has moved towards what we call enhanced decision support or impact decision support. It's as simple as somebody calling on the telephone and asking, what's the weather tomorrow, I'm going out to the beach or whatever, to an emergency manager, even a governor or mayor, or even a higher ranking official saying, I've got this big event going on, what's going to happen? So for stuff, for big events like the Heritage or the Bridge Run here in Charleston, for example, those are two that we each year go on site at the command center with other agencies that are supporting the event to provide the weather information that they need to keep everyone safe.
It really has changed. Now, I've noticed over the years, people say, well, I survived Hugo, I survived Gracie, or what would you say to those folks?
Well, that's a classic issue with Hugo. Hugo, most people in Charleston anyway, did not actually experience the Category 4 winds of Hugo. They were more like 2 or 3. Still very bad, but the worst of it was actually in the lesser populated areas of what was back then Mount Pleasant and Awendaw, now highly, developed. I don't know the numbers, but a lot more than was here in 1989. Even the storms that we've recently had, like Matthew, for example, that everyone feels like they survived, and they did survive something, but that was a weakening storm paralleling the coast for the most part, even though you saw what the amount of tree damage it did. Mm-hmm. This area can and has experienced major hurricanes, and it's just a matter of when, not if, and we all need to be prepared for the consequences of that, particularly the storm surge, which has become a major issue for all of our coastal cities, but Charleston, Beaufort, Savannah, that are in our area, are very vulnerable to storm surge.
Now, with the storm surge, typically it's said if they come in south of us, that's when Beaufort County is in more trouble.
Right. So it matters where the storm is, how strong the storm is, the angle of attack. It's easier to show graphically, but if you imagine the hurricane as a pinwheel, for example, spinning counterclockwise, if you're to the right of that, that air is blowing from the water toward the coast. So it's pushing all that water from the Atlantic Ocean, in this case, toward the coastline, the beaches. It has to go somewhere. It runs up and floods everything. The stronger the storm, the more water.
And the time of the storm approaching?
The time of the, so if it's coincident with a high tide, that can make another several foot difference. If it's a really major storm, it's going to be bad either way. But it can make the difference in maybe, say, a weak or more marginal storm where maybe it wouldn't have flooded as badly if it came at low tide, for example.
Right. For example, with Irma.
Yeah.
We got a lot of flooding in Beaufort County from Irma, and it really was not that heavy of a storm.
No. So that was a perfect example of how the environment, the water is largely governed, for the most part. We're finding other things going on in the ocean now, but is largely governed by how much wind is pushing on the surface of the water. Irma was hundreds of miles away, crossing over the peninsula of Florida, but the onshore flow, persistent for days, we knew was going to be an issue. Our models showed it was going to be an issue. We told everybody, look, don't focus on where the hurricane is. Focus on what we think the impacts are going to be. Similar to Florence. Florence was a weakening hurricane by its wind category, but not by other impacts such as heavy rainfall flooding.
So basically the answer is listen to emergency management, listen to the Weather Service when they say it's time to go. It's time to go. We do live in the low country.
That's right. So what we're trying to do is provide the best weather information we can for an emergency manager in this case to make the most informed decision that they can. It doesn't mean that every piece of information we provide is correct, because there's a lot of uncertainty to what we do in our business. In fact, it's all uncertainty is involved, probabilities, but we give the best that we can to make that, for them to make the decision. Do they evacuate, do they not evacuate, and all that they have to do.
Now let's shift gears a little bit, but sort of on the same line. Waterspouts, tornadoes, not like they have in the Midwest, but still a possibility around here.
Absolutely. They can happen anywhere in our country and a lot of places in the world. We tend to do, you're right, we tend to get the weaker ones. They're classified kind of like hurricanes, where they have a scale from 0 to 5. EF, we call it EF, Enhanced Fujita, 0 to 5, whereas a hurricane is category 1 to 5. A lot of ours are 0s through maybe 1s and 2s, enough to do damage, and they can kill you. We can get stronger ones. We've had 4. We had a EF4 about a little more than 10 years ago, just before I got here, in our Georgia area. So they can happen, and we need to be aware of that.
Now, shifting gears one more time into other natural disasters that are prone to this area. Tsunami has been mentioned, earthquakes have been mentioned. Tell us a little bit about that.
So tsunamis, we are the point of where we would relay the warnings to the public from the National Tsunami Warning Center, which is part of the National Weather Service. They're actually centered in Palmer, Alaska, where they monitor part of the Pacific, all the Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean, and Western Atlantic. We do have a threat. It's a little bit unknown. Our biggest threat would be, there's kind of 2 big ones. If there's an earthquake in the Puerto Rico Trench, which is just north of the island of Puerto Rico, it's a very seismic area that's quite active. If that were to generate, we think something like an 8, it would have to be a really strong quake. That would put a wave, send a wave out and impact the entire east coast of the United States. Could be several feet of water rise within 5, 7, 8 hours, something like that from the incident. But another one, lesser known, and would be almost impossible to detect, the continental shelf. If you think of the east coast of the United States and then a mirror of it offshore, it's called the shelf, and then it drops way deep. So it's like a little mountain, a little cliff out there in the ocean. If that has a landslide or some sort of slide off of that, that can displace water, create a tsunami that moves back toward our coast within less than an hour, and there might not even be a seismic indication of it by the folks that usually detect, like USGS, that would detect the earthquake. Mm-hmm. It might not be seismically detected. It might all of a sudden you'd get this rush of water, a tsunami come in. So we have an issue here. We have a threat. It's not necessarily been historically very prevalent, but it's there.
And then how about earthquake?
Earthquake, we absolutely have a threat. We get multiple quakes a year. They're small. We have what's called an implied fault. And I'm not a seismologist, so technically I'm not super qualified, but I know a lot about it. And that fault, which is largely centered from, say, Somerville down to Middleton Plantation, kind of down the Ashley River. Mm-hmm. We know that back in the late 1800s there was a 7.2, 7.3 quake in Charleston that devastated this area. So we know it can happen. And it can happen again. We just don't know when. There's not a lot of data on that.
Gotcha. Now let's come back full circle. Let's go back to the hurricanes really quick. And a couple of them, I wouldn't say myths, whatever, but we were talking about the continental shelf. We were talking about with the hurricanes. Every once in a while I'll hear somebody say, well, that shelf keeps the hurricanes from being so strong. The trade winds send it back out to sea. That's why we never get hit. No,
really, hurricanes go where the large-scale wind flow takes them. So if you think of sort of a cork in a stream, it's guided by the deeper lower wind flow. So in general, as hurricanes, they kind of can take two, I don't want to oversimplify it, but let's say they're coming off the coast of Africa, what we call the Cape Verde storms, and they come all the way across the tropical Atlantic, and then they have to decide, am I going to go straight into the Caribbean and maybe the Gulf of Mexico, or am I going to curve right and maybe impact Florida and the east coast of the United States? Those are kind of the two choices that they can do. And that curvature is very difficult to forecast, and there's no reason why we can't get hit more than we have, say, in the last century. There's no reason. It's just a matter of slightly shifting the pattern, which could happen. Back in the 1800s, Savannah, for example, was pummeled many times, you know, in the later part of that century anyway, and sometimes multiple times in a year. And you talk to somebody in Savannah or you look at the records, there really hasn't been anything bad since the late 1800s. Yeah, they had David in 79, but there really hasn't anything. And so people think that nothing can happen. It's not true. We are all open to the same threat and vulnerable to hurricanes here. It's just a question of the pattern.
Now, are we in an up cycle right now? Because I know during the 70s we didn't really have a lot, 60s, Are we in an up cycle for hurricanes at this point?
As the Atlantic Basin, Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico as a whole, so that whole basin, that's all considered one. Since the mid-90s, we've been in an up cycle, and those, they think, last generally about 30 years. So we're getting out of that. We should be, in theory, if that cycle is holding, would be getting out of that. But there's so many other things that affect hurricanes. Our waters have been warmer than we thought probably 30 years ago. We're also worried about climate change now more than we were 30 years ago. And those are going to impact, maybe not as much the number, but maybe the intensity of the storms that impact. Because remember, it's not really about the number. Yes, if you put 20 out in the Atlantic, maybe your odds are higher that you might get hit, but not really. It's really about where they're going. Andrew in 1992 was a well below normal year in Homestead/Miami, got clocked by a Category 5 storm that was reclassified to a Category 5, so it really doesn't matter.
Gotcha. Well, thanks for joining us. I tell you, anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up today?
I think just, you know, knowing the hazards that are in this area, which are many, we've discussed almost all of them here, and taking the hurricane season seriously, having a plan for your home, your business, school, wherever you are, or all of the above, and taking it seriously. Don't pay much attention to that seasonal forecast. It really has no bearing on what your preparations for the year should be, or for the hurricane season should be. And the season is just ramping up. Even though the summer, we feel like, you know, we're getting into August now, things should be kind of going down, kids are going back to school. That's getting into the peak of the hurricane season.
Ron, thanks for letting us join you. Thanks for letting us come to Charleston today and visit with you for a few minutes. Have you got any contact information if they want to go to the website or anything?
Sure. Our website, which has a lot of data and information on it, is www.weather.gov/CHS. And if you can't remember all that, just go to weather.gov, not com, weather.gov, and you'll get a map, and you just click on that map in any area that you want in the United States, and it'll go to the office that serves what you need.
Gotcha. Well, again, thanks for letting us join you here today, and back to the studio.
When the waves swell, the wind blows, and rain starts to pour, you'll ask yourself, how prepared or unprepared are you? Did you board your windows, protect your home? Secure loose objects so they won't blow away. Bring large items in and low items up. If you're properly prepared, it will help in a big way. Does your family have a plan? Do they know what to do? Is your emergency kit packed, waiting by the door for you? Just because you're not on the coast doesn't mean you're okay. Heavy winds and flooding can wash things away. When a hurricane is near, you need to stay safe. Turn on the radio. Wait for updates. Only leave your home if told so. Grab your bag and go, go, go. Now, if you're home and the heavy wind blows, get away from the windows, watch out for flooding, and protect yourself. You may be without power for a couple days, but your emergency kit should help you to stay. Once the storm is gone and it's safe to go home, be cautious of what's going on. If water's in your path, you have to turn back. Dangerous electricity and things you can't see can hurt you very badly. So before the waves swell, the wind blows, and rain starts to pour, get prepared, make a plan, and protect yourself each and every way. America's Prepare-a-thon. Be smart. Take part. Prepare. Get started today. Go to ready.gov/prepare.
Thank you, Scott. We're back with Major Bob Bromage with the Beaufort County Sheriff's Office. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure.
And you want people to call you Bob, not Major.
I do.
This is Bob. And Bob has a long list of very fine credentials. He's a graduate of the FBI Academy. He is a cold case investigator with the Sheriff's Office. He's been on national television with some of his cases. And right now, we're going to focus on what he does for Beaufort County as a public information officer for natural disasters with the Sheriff's Department. Do you get any time off?
Sure I do. Sure I do.
Well, let's talk about communications with the Sheriff's Department. What does that entail?
Well, during a natural disaster, it's a very unique situation because we figured out after Hurricane Matthew in 2016 that we didn't have it right. So we went into a mode of locating where our residents and guests are comfortable getting their information. And a lot of it's through Facebook. And we found a lot of misinformation was fed through Facebook and we weren't addressing it. So we put into play a plan to address social media better, because that is where over 2 billion people in the world are on Facebook and other social medias. So we really needed to focus on that. So we did a concentrated effort to identify where our problems were and to have a presence on those sites.
A daunting task with
Very
all
daunting
the misinformation out there. And you also use other venues to get your message out.
We use our website, B.C.S.O.net. We use Twitter. We use Facebook. We use Nextdoor. And our primary way to communicate with the public is through Nixle. And we encourage our residents and guests to sign up for Nixle locally. It's nixle.com. And all you have to do is put in your zip code and you'll get regular public information regarding crime, natural disasters, anything that's going to impact the public with public safety. We put out regularly, and it keeps people informed. And an informed community is a very effective community, and it keeps the misinformation down, and that's what we're trying to do.
It's a great service. I subscribe myself, if I may editorialize for a moment, and I think it's wonderful and fascinating. It's almost like your own newspaper in a way.
It is, and controlling the narrative is very important, because if you don't have a presence out there, and Nixle connects to Twitter and Facebook, so whatever we put out through Nixle goes right to Facebook or right to Twitter. So you're controlling the narrative early and often. And if you allow it to fester on social media, you lose control of that narrative. And that's where the misinformation comes in. So it's been very effective. Nixle, we had about 4,000 residents subscribed prior to Hurricane Matthew in 2016. Last count last week was 34,000 people are now signed up. So people are getting, that's where they're going to get their consistent information. That's going to be the official word from the government, and it's very important. It's built some trust with the community.
And now here we are once again in hurricane season, all the more valuable. Once again, it's Nixle, Nixle.com. Okay,
right.
Very good. And you also do Twitter and Nextdoor. I think most people know what Twitter is, but what is Nextdoor?
Nextdoor is where neighborhoods interact, and it's grown in Beaufort County. Right now, there's 44,000 people signed up for Nextdoor. And what they do is there's pockets, these communities all over Beaufort County are signed up to share information about their neighborhoods. But what it does for us is it gives us another avenue to impact 44,000 residents, and we do that regularly as well. So when we put information out during a hurricane, it goes from Nixle to Facebook and Twitter. It gets copied to Nextdoor, and we also have it on our website, so it's all over the place. So people are able to access that information rather than go to an untrusted source. Now, we have great relationships with our local media. The Island Packet Beaufort Gazette. They traditionally are embedded during a hurricane with the public information officer. So there's regular communication, so there's not a disconnect. So the public is getting official information from not only the government, but the trusted, newspaper, radio, and television as well. And we work well together, and it's been very effective since Hurricane Matthew. So.
Well, you have a master's degree in criminal justice.
I do.
Where did you get your training to be a public information officer?
Part of it was through that, but I mean, a lot of it's what did I say, the School of Hard Knocks.
Been there.
Hurricane Matthew, we had a incident at the Tanger Outlets with an officer, deputy involved shooting back in 2016, so a lot was learned from that, but also you reach out to people that are in the field. But every community is unique, so we've had to figure out where our public likes to get their information. So we know we have a heavy Facebook presence in Beaufort County. We have a smaller Twitter presence, but we have a huge Nextdoor presence as well. So that is where we focus our efforts. But again, Nixle has grown so much that really people are well informed at this point. But training, Anderson University puts on what they call the Command College of South Carolina. So I graduated with my master's in December. And my capstone project was actually police public information. And a lot of that capstone project included lessons learned from Hurricane Matthew and national incidents where the police have failed and law enforcement's failed in keeping the public informed. Ferguson, Missouri. There was a great lesson from the Boston Police Department during the marathon bombing, where the chief of police went out on Twitter and controlled the narrative and was able to keep people calm and well informed. So those are the lessons you look at. The bad ones and the good ones.
Well, we don't know what we don't know. And as we continue to gain experience and grow and reach out to the community, which you also do as a member of the Board of Regents with the Bluffton Chamber of Commerce.
It's actually the Hilton Head Chamber of Commerce and leadership Hilton Head Bluffton.
Oh, excuse me.
That's okay. No, Bluffton's got their Chamber of Commerce, and there's a Hilton Head Bluffton Chamber of Commerce.
Oh, okay.
I'm on the Board of Regents for now with the leadership program.
All right, great. So that gives you an opportunity to connect with a lot of people.
It does in the business community and other organizations, yes.
What else do people need to know about natural disasters and staying informed, keeping themselves informed? I know citizens have to have a responsibility in this as well.
We just ask people to be responsible on social media. We love for them to repeat the message that we're sending out rather than, what we saw during Hurricane Matthew. You had, somebody that stayed behind on Hilton Head in an unaffected area, because some areas were unaffected, but there were areas in Beaufort County heavily affected. And when they were putting things out on Facebook like sunny skies and no damage, people were encouraged to come back at that point. And when they came back, they ran into our checkpoints, because it was not safe for them to return. So that was a failure on our part to keep the public informed through social media. Now we're urging people during a hurricane or other public safety crisis to stay tuned to Nixle, Nextdoor, Facebook, and it's Beaufort County Sheriff's Office. I mean, because we are sending the information out there. There's no reason for people at this point not to be informed by us, because we establish an early presence and a frequent presence. So we're all over it, and they may get something every 45 minutes, but you know what? Too much information is better than not enough, and we figured that out.
Okay. And when we return after an evacuation, that requires a lot of maneuvering. I'm sure you can't re-enter until the roads are clear, till the power's on. Is that correct?
Right. We want people back in their homes and their businesses as soon as possible. We are not trying to delay that process. We need to make sure it's safe first. And as soon as it's deemed safe, we will put that word out that it's okay to return. And we ask people to be patient. It's hard to be patient. It's expensive to leave town and stay in a hotel. And we get that. And unfortunately, the situation may not be safe where they live. So we need to make sure that we're taking care of our community.
Well, I'd rather stay in a motel than get electrocuted by a downed power line.
Exactly.
Yes. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
For the good work you do.
Thank you.
With the Sheriff's Department.
I appreciate that.
All right. And thank you for joining us today. But before we go, anything else?
No, again,
We covered it all.
we're very fortunate to have a community that stays informed and is interested in public safety. And we formed a great partnership with our community, and we look forward to keeping that going.
I'd like to thank you, Major Bob Bromage, Bob, for being here with us today, and thank you also for your good work with the Sheriff's Department and keeping people informed.
My pleasure, thank you.
And we'll be right back after these messages.
See on page 4 that the projections need to be flood next Thursday?
Seriously? Thursday? Can't do that.
This is really inconvenient.
I have yoga that day. I have no time for this. So,
I can't do Thursday, but I can do Friday.
Disasters don't plan ahead. You can. Talk to your loved ones about how you're going to be ready in an emergency. Don't wait. Communicate.
Being prepared is a part of who you are, but it's especially important in the case of a disaster. Be informed about possible emergencies in your area. Make a plan that covers where you'll go in an emergency. Build a kit with the things you need to survive. There's no one more capable of planning for your situation than you. Start your plan today. Go to ready.gov/myplan.
Welcome back to Coastline. I am joined now by Pamela Cobb. Welcome to Coastline.
Thank you for having me.
And Pamela has a huge job. She is the Disaster Recovery Coordinator for Beaufort County. She's part of the great safety net that is in place, hundreds of people who protect our citizens during natural disasters. Pamela is technically an employee of the Public Works Department, and we'll get to that in a bit. But she has a bachelor's degree in public safety, a master's degree in emergency management, plus lots of on-the-job experience. And tell us, I know you sat in traffic, as many of us did, during Hurricane Floyd evacuation in 1999. Things have changed a lot since then.
Absolutely.
And your job is pretty complicated and not easy. So tell us what you do.
So during an event, we actually are in correspondence with emergency management. We actually have personnel in the Emergency Operations Center. For Public Works operation, we actually have a ton of staff, the Public Works staff for the county, located at Burton Wells. And so we are gearing up and waiting for direction from emergency management to be able to start doing debris operations for that. Along with that, we are getting ready, from my perspective, for recovery efforts. So when emergency management is trying to communicate with all of the different emergency support functions, fire, medical, military, all of that to make the operation function, I'm getting ready just as well for our recovery function partners so that there's a smooth transition between response to recovery. So, and we always say too that response begins at response, or recovery begins at response. So we are trying to make it as smooth a transition as possible to be able to make it as expedited as we can and get back to normal operations.
So you set up a base at Burton Wells.
Yes.
And how many people does that involve?
Anywhere from, you're looking over 100 people, definitely. And we always have some municipalities come and join. We always invite utilities to come and station there if they would like to. Some of our other county departments also, in addition to Public Works, mosquito control, traffic engineering, they all house there.
And do you stay there during the event?
We do. So especially if it is like it has been for the last several events, we stay in county and house there until we're able to really go back to normal working conditions and go back to our regular working locations.
So you set up with your computers for communication, your satellite phones still, are they in use? Heavy equipment?
So all of our heavy equipment is already stationed throughout the county. They've already stationed all of those things. We are in communication. We have direct line to the Emergency Operations Center. We're in contact with our contractors in case we need to activate those for our heavy debris removal contracts. That's another piece of my job that I do. And yes, we're in communication with a ton of recovery function partners as well as the operation for response at hand.
So it's a pretty sophisticated and complex operation.
Think of it being like a mini emergency operations center, a satellite emergency operations center. Debris operation is one of our largest operations aside from what's going on with emergency response. It just takes that many people for us to be able to cut and toss roads and make it suitable for emergency vehicles to get through.
And we can't return. We can't come back to Beaufort County after an evacuation until the debris operation has been completed, I assume.
It has to be at least for our first cut and toss, where essentially emergency services, Public Works, Fire Department is able to clearly ride through and assist citizens. So there's a few things that have to happen more emergency management wise. We want to make sure our power's back up and running. There's not utility lines down. And those are those things that they are coming across and dealing with as they're cutting and tossing to make sure it is safe for citizens to come back into town.
And you work closely with FEMA.
I do.
Tell us about that.
It is never what is expected. It takes so much longer than we planned for. Like you stated too, I went to school for emergency management, and book knowledge is great, but it is definitely not how it plays out in real life. It always takes a lot longer.
So working with FEMA entails quite a bit of paperwork, as
Absolutely.
I understand it.
Absolutely. One of the lessons learned we had from Hurricane Matthew, we had the wonderful activation of our contractors for debris removal. Because it was such a large event for Beaufort County, we hadn't had anything since 50 years prior. So one of the things we did going to Hurricane Irma is we didn't activate any contractors. So that became all internal documentation. It was one of those, it was definitely a lesson learned of we are definitely not on top of handling the documentation the way we need to. And so actually I just came from training this morning, walking through with our Public Works people to be able to fill out the forms correctly. If you don't do it regularly, you forget how to do it. So, I mean, we want to definitely keep making sure that we are up to date and people have no questions of how to fill out the forms correctly, because that's essentially how we're going to be able to get reimbursement.
And so this is how the community is reimbursed, and the county.
So
correctly?
there's two different areas. There's public assistance, which refers to local government. So your improvements for roads, bridges, facilities, county government. That's on the public assistance side. So when we talk about the county received reimbursement for $5 million, that's what it's in relation to. For the private citizen, that refers to individual assistance. And so that's where you yourself can go and apply to FEMA and say, I've had such and such damage to my home, I need help through my insurance, and if insurance doesn't cover it, I would apply to FEMA and see what other costs they would reimburse me for.
Now, is there a website or, well, we spoke earlier in this episode of Coastline with Major Bob Bromage about communications. I imagine he's covered that pretty much. As far as filing paperwork, doing that sort of thing, he will be on top of getting those communications out for people who need that personal assistance, that individual assistance.
And I will say, to clarify too, we are actually one of the only counties that splits our response effort to our recovery effort. So emergency management takes care, they are lead agency for response. So while you're evacuating, coming back into the county, they have it. At some point in the future, there is actually a clear, definitive, okay, county recovery actually takes care of recovery for the county and as a whole for Beaufort County. So we actually then will start putting out press releases. You'll hear from the county website and county public information officer, all that stuff coming out to keep everybody apprised of what's going on. We also keep it on our Beaufort County disasterrecovery.net website, any disaster recovery related information, anything legal assistance, how you can apply to FEMA, where we're at in the declaration process, anything at all, we put that information on there. So you can actually find documents from Irma and Matthew of what we did, declarations we had to make internally in the county.
What site is that once again?
Sure, it's Beaufort County disasterrecovery.net.
Beaufort County disasterrecovery.net.
I know it's a mouthful.
It is, but we'll throw up a graphic so people will know where to go. Well, you, in addition to your education, you've had quite a bit of experience in emergency management over at the Emergency Management Center during events.
Yes.
And I'm sure that augmented your wonderful education.
Oh, yes. So I did not know taking this position, though 8 months into taking it, we would get hit by Hurricane Matthew. So it was trial by fire. So during Hurricane Matthew, yes, I was in the Emergency Operations Center, kind of getting ready for recovery efforts, getting to observe what was going on, situation awareness. Because the thing too is when we make decisions in response, they affect how we're going to recover. So it's observation from my point of how we need to respond in long-term recovery or get ready for some of those programs, FEMA coming down, coordination with the state and other recovery function partners.
We have a lot of gated communities in Beaufort County, and there has been some discussion about recovery efforts and cleanup efforts there. Do we have agreements with these communities, or how does that work?
So County Council passed several years ago that as far as a cut and toss, pushing the debris to the roadway, the county already determined years ago they would do that. They want to make sure emergency services can get into the private gated communities. We already on a regular basis provide law enforcement into those communities to respond to calls. So it was under the same premise. We would provide those services no matter if there was a federal declaration or not. We would provide that service because same for Irma. We didn't have a federal we didn't do as much of a declaration for Irma, so we still do that during Hurricane Matthew.
What else does our community need to know that we haven't touched on during this segment of Coastline?
Recovery is a long process, and that was one of the things I did not realize even going through this. I kind of always felt like I was behind the 8 ball, trying to work as fast as possible, get the information out as quickly to residents so that they could know what was going on. But that is one thing. It is, even working through the FEMA process myself, it is, there's a lot to it. And so sometimes it can be very frustrating for citizens who are trying to navigate through the process. That's why we're here. That's why feel free, give me a phone call and we will talk through it. I just, my concern though for those citizens is I don't want them to feel like they're getting the runaround when there are so many FEMA programs out there. Sometimes you may be denied through a FEMA program, but that opens you up for other FEMA monies. So they might put you into a different program. So sometimes just because you get denied in one area doesn't mean you're uneligible for any other funding. So it's like, hey, just keep in there and be patient with the process, but it is a frustrating process. It can be frustrating.
Well, certainly, especially with so many residents who
Absolutely.
may be affected not just by hurricanes, but by other natural disasters
Absolutely.
in Beaufort County, and you work all of them.
Yes, ma'am. Yes. All of our disaster-related plans are an all-hazard approach. So aside from a federal declaration and FEMA and state folks coming down, our plans are the same that they are in a normal, thunderstorm. We've had some severe thunderstorms here where we've had to have public works crews go out and assist to calls and those kind of things. And sometimes it seemed like worse than a hurricane we've had to activate for. So our plans are in place, and we do the same thing we would, just bigger scale. And that's the beauty of the plan that we have in place, is that we can expand it or decrease it as much as we need to.
This has been very informative. Pamela Cobb, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Please stay informed. It's very important.
The County Channel is also available on video on demand. Go to BeaufortCountySC.gov, scroll down to Public Meetings, click Watch Now, and then click the Video on Demand button and select your program from the list.
Call the meeting to order.
If you'd like a DVD of this program, click on the link on the right and fill out the order form. And thank you for watching the County Channel.
If I could go back and change it all, I would. I think I'm gonna miss you the most. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Maybe it's just the little moments. If I could go back and change it all, if I could go back, I would. But I can't.